The year is 1347. Europe is about to be hit by a deadly disaster that will change the fate of the continent forever. A ruthless killer is spreading rapidly from town to town, leaving a wake of horror, despair, and death. The people call it the Black Death. In this video, we will uncover the catastrophe of the 14th century plague, how it began, how it spread, and how it transformed medieval society. The Black Death was perhaps the greatest public health disaster in recorded history. A deadly plague that ravaged Europe and changed the course of the continent forever. It was the first outbreak of medieval Europe's greatest killer, the bubonic plague caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. This vicious disease would recur periodically over 400 years, taking nearly 200 million lives in its wake. But it was the pestilence of the 14th century that would become seared into the collective memory of medieval society as the Black Death. Over the course of just 6 years, between 1347 to 1353, this maternal plague likely killed up to 60% of Europe's population in a dark epoch of unremitting panic, agony, and death. Prior to the Black Death, medieval Europe had experienced a period of stability and expansion. Advances in agriculture supported robust population growth. Sophisticated trade networks fostered the growth of major commercial hubs. By 1300, European capitals like Paris, Venice, and Genoa boasted over 100,000 inhabitants each. However, these densely populated urban centers were ripe for the spread of contagion. The Black Death originated somewhere in the vast Eurasian steppe region, likely in the early 1340s. There, the highly virulent medieval strain of Y. pestis incubated within colonies of wild rodents. Carried by fleas, it spread to other animals and then humans through a simple flea bite. The disease soon traveled east and west along established Mongol trade routes. By 1346, it had reached the Black Sea, where Italians maintained trading outposts and ports. In 1347, a fleet of Genoese ships arrived at the Sicilian port of Messina. On board were not goods for trade, but disease and death. Many sailors were already dying with mysterious dark boils and fever when they reached harbor. Despite attempts to bar entry, some ships managed to unload their plague-stricken rats and fleas onto Italian soil, spelling catastrophe for medieval Europe. Over the next 5 years, the Black Death exploded across the continent, moving at an average rate of 1.5 kilometers per day. The Italian poet Petrarch described the onslaught saying,
"Wasting disease and death swept our region. Soon the only sound in the streets were the cries and lamentations about deaths and funerals."
By early 1348, Florence lost over 50,000 people, half its citizens. Entire households were wiped out, bodies piled up in mass grave sites. There were not enough living to bury the dead. From Italy, merchant ships ferried their stowaway plague rats northwards, and by 1348 outbreaks erupted across France and the Holy Roman Empire. The disease brought tremendous human suffering, often killing within days of infection. Initial flu-like symptoms rapidly gave way to painful swollen lymph nodes, high fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and blood-tinged coughing. Dark leathery buboes formed under limbs as the victims' blood began to seep from their pores in continuous sweating. Near the bitter end, the skin blackened, giving rise to the disease's infamous moniker, the Black Death. Such horrifying symptoms was accompanied by the overpowering stench of rotting flesh and defecation, as millions lay dying in cramped, unhygienic medieval communities lacking proper sanitation or healthcare. Streets and waterways filled with bloated bodies. Funeral houses overflowed as families were made extinct. Fanned by land travel and maritime trade, the plague reached every corner of Europe by 1350, from Scandinavia to Spain. The impact to human life was simply unprecedented. Rural communities and small towns certainly suffered losses, but larger cities were hollowed out by as much as 80% mortality. Venice lost 60% of its 110,000 souls. Hamburg and Bremen were deserted and nearly ceased to exist. For those who endured the living nightmare of contagion, they often awoke to find employment evaporating, institutions crumbling and social bonds disintegrating. Fields and workshops were abandoned. Guilds and monasteries were marginalized as membership ranks culled by disease. Florentine banks faced financial ruin as branches folded. Faith in the church was shaken amidst massive deaths, including many senior clergy and nuns. Very quickly, The plague's secondary effects induced severe economic impacts and societal changes across the entire continent that permanently altered the medieval status quo, bringing feudalism itself close to collapse. However, the resilience, adaptation, and recovery of Europeans over generations following the Black Death launched the transition towards the Renaissance and the early modern world. The Black Death completely upended established order across Europe socially, economically, politically, and religiously. Although recovery took generations, the dramatic changes induced by the plague shifted Europe away from the medieval period towards new thinking and the Renaissance. But questions still remain all these centuries later. Could another pandemic like the Black Death emerge again? What lessons can we learn by understanding this medieval tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that little bell icon for more upcoming historical unveilings. Thanks for watching History Reforged.